Okay, so today we're going deep on something I think we all struggle with,
Oh, yeah, for sure.
our emotions,
Oh, yes.
and like how to actually understand them better.
Absolutely.
So to guide this deep dive, we've got Rational Emotive Behavior Therapy on 100 Key Points and Techniques.
A great book.
And I think most people listening already get that, It's not just the things that happen to us, it's more about how we think about them.
Totally.
But this book really digs into the why.
Oh, yeah.
And gives us like practical ways to get a grip on our reactions.
Absolutely. And one of the biggest things REBT brings to the table, is that it's not the activating event, the A,
Yeah.
that makes us feel a certain way. It's
Yeah.
the B, our beliefs
Yeah.
about that event that
Yeah.
determine the C, the consequence, or how we feel.
It's like that saying, we
Yeah.
don't see things as they are, we see them as we are.
Oh, that's good. That's really good.
So like imagine you're at work
Okay.
and your boss gives you some feedback. Now one person might hear that feedback and think, great, this is helpful, I can use this.
Yeah.
Right.
And they feel motivated.
Yeah.
Another person might hear the exact same feedback
Right.
and instantly think, oh, no, they hate my work. I'm going to get fired.
Totally different reaction.
Same event, two totally different emotional outcomes.
Exactly.
It all comes down to those beliefs.
And so the book really highlights how when those beliefs at B get really rigid
Yeah.
and extreme, that's when things can get messy.
Oh, absolutely. And they talk about 4 main types of these irrational beliefs.
Okay.
First, we have demands.
Mm-hmm.
These musts, shoulds, and ought-tos we put on ourselves and others.
Oh, yeah, like I must get that raise.
Exactly. Or, my partner should always know what I'm thinking.
Right, or life must be fair.
Precisely. And those kinds of beliefs, well, they set us up for a lot of disappointment and frustration.
Because let's be honest, life isn't always fair.
Not even close sometimes.
All right, so demands, what's the next one?
Awfulizing, my personal favorite.
Okay, awfulizing. Tell me more.
This is when we take something that's maybe just a little inconvenient or unpleasant
Yeah,
and blow it way out of proportion like it's the end of the world.
I see.
So picture this. You're already late for a meeting,
Okay, been there.
and you can't find a parking space anywhere.
The worst.
Instead of thinking, okay, this is annoying, but I'll find a spot eventually,
Yeah.
you think, this is horrible. I'm going to be so late. Everyone will be judging me. My whole career is over.
That escalated quickly.
Awfulizing at its finest.
Wow. Okay, so we've got demands, we've got awfulizing.
2 down, 2 to go.
What's number 3?
Low frustration tolerance, or, as we call it in the biz, LFT.
Okay, LFT, what is that exactly?
It's that I can't stand it mentality.
Oh, yeah, I know that one.
Any little thing that doesn't go your way,
It's unbearable.
it feels like the absolute worst, like you just can't cope.
And it's not just like major life events either.
No. It could be something small like your internet being slow
Oh, I feel
Yeah.
that one.
or spilling your coffee. But to someone with LFT, it feels like the end of the world.
Right.
They just feel like they can't handle any kind of discomfort.
Okay, makes sense. So what's the last one?
Depreciation beliefs.
Okay, depreciation, break that down for me.
It's when we put ourselves, others, or even life itself down.
Oh, so it's like that negative self-talk.
Gets
Like,
you that.
I'm not good enough, or everyone else is better than me.
Or life is just a pointless struggle.
So basically all the fun stuff.
The things that really help us live our best lives.
Yeah, totally.
It's not always that extreme,
Right.
but it's that underlying sense of negativity.
Yeah, okay, so we've got these 4 main types of irrational beliefs.
Yeah.
Demands, awfulizing, LFT, and depreciation.
The Fab Four of emotional distress.
Oh, I like that.
It's important to remember that everyone experiences these beliefs to some degree.
Yeah, for sure.
It's just that when they become really rigid and frequent,
Yeah.
that's when they start to cause problems.
It's like they take over.
Exactly. And that's where REBT comes in.
So the book also spends some time talking about the therapeutic relationship
Yeah.
and how in REBT, the therapist is seen as a guide, like a teacher.
That's right. We're like psychological educators.
Okay.
But the book stresses that this doesn't mean every REBT therapist acts the same.
So it's not like a one-size-fits-all approach.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Some clients might feel more comfortable with a therapist who's more formal,
Yeah.
emphasizing their expertise and knowledge.
Like if they really value authority.
Exactly.
Okay.
While others might respond better to a therapist who's a bit more informal, more personable.
Yeah, like someone they feel like they can really connect with on a personal level.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's about being adaptable
Absolutely.
to each client's individual needs and personality.
And the key here, the book says, is authenticity.
Right.
You can't fake being an expert if you're not.
Yeah.
And you definitely shouldn't try to force a connection if it's not genuine.
Right. You can't be overly warm if that's just not you.
And ethically, if a therapist really feels like they just can't connect with a client, the book suggests considering a referral to someone who might be a better fit.
Yeah, because that relationship really is so important.
It's the foundation.
Now, something else the book talks about that I found interesting was using humor in REBT.
Oh, yeah, humor can be a really powerful tool.
But it also seems like it could be tricky.
It definitely requires sensitivity and careful judgment.
So how is humor used effectively in REBT?
Well, the idea is to help clients see the absurdity of their irrational beliefs.
I can see that.
But the humor should always be directed at the belief itself,
Right.
never at the person.
Okay, that makes sense.
And it's super important to gauge the client's receptiveness to humor.
Yeah, because not everyone finds things funny in the same way.
Exactly. Some people might find humor in therapy dismissive or distracting.
Right.
They might focus too much on the joke and miss the point.
You don't want it to undermine the therapeutic work. Now, there's also this idea of varying your influence base as a therapist.
Right.
What does that mean in practice?
So as we were saying, some clients are really swayed by expertise.
Yeah, like, oh, wow, this therapist has read in all these books. They must know what they're talking about.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So emphasizing those credentials, experience, publications, that can really build confidence in the client.
Oh.
But then you have other clients who are more drawn to the therapist's warmth and likability.
Like they want to feel a personal connection.
Yeah, they want to feel like you understand them as a person.
So it's about finding that sweet spot
Exactly.
between being yourself, but also tailoring your approach to meet the individual's needs.
And again, being authentic is crucial.
Now, when someone first starts REBT therapy, the book describes it as pretty active directive.
Especially in the early stages.
For someone who's never experienced that, what would that look like?
Well, in the beginning, the therapist is going to be more hands-on, helping you really pinpoint those feelings that are troubling you. And then identifying those specific irrational beliefs that are feeding those feelings.
Okay.
Will actively teach you the ABC model.
Okay.
And how to connect the dots between your thoughts and emotions.
So it's not just sitting there and talking about your feelings.
It's about understanding the underlying process.
Right. So it's very educational at the start.
Absolutely.
But then the book also mentions that this directiveness changes over time.
That's right.
How does that happen?
So the goal in REBT is for you to ultimately become your own therapist.
That's ambitious.
It is, but it's the best way to ensure long-term change.
Okay.
As you start to grasp the principles of REBT and learn how to apply them, the therapist gradually steps back, encouraging you to take more initiative.
Like taking the training wheels off.
Exactly. We want you to be able to identify and challenge your own irrational beliefs.
So it's a process of empowering the client. And you know that idea of REBT being an educational approach?
Yeah.
It's a really interesting way to frame therapy.
It is, isn't it?
So what are some of the core learning principles involved in REBT?
Well, pacing is really important.
Okay.
We want to make sure we're introducing new concepts at a speed that works for you.
Right, not overwhelming anyone.
Exactly. And then another key principle is the difference between understanding something intellectually and actually agreeing with it emotionally.
Oh, that's a good point.
You can understand the ABC model on a cognitive level.
Yeah.
But that doesn't necessarily mean you're fully convinced or ready to apply it in your own life.
Yeah, that's like knowing that vegetables are good for you, but still reaching for the cookies.
Exactly. So the book talks about the importance of exploring any disagreements or hesitations you might have.
Yeah, because there can be a lot of resistance to changing our thinking.
Oh, absolutely.
Another principle the book highlights is client responsibility. You know, emphasizing that you're actively involved in learning these rational ideals.
It's not just about the therapist giving you the answers.
Right.
You have to be an active participant.
And of course, breaking down those complex concepts into manageable pieces.
Right.
So it's not so overwhelming.
We want to make sure you can actually process and digest the information.
Yeah.
And then finally, the book talks about the value of bibliotherapy.
Bibliotherapy?
Which is just a fancy word for recommending specific self-help books or articles that align with your needs and understanding.
So it's like providing additional resources to support the work you're doing in therapy.
Right. And the type of resource really depends on the client.
Yeah.
Some people might be ready for a deep dive into REB theory.
Right.
While others might prefer a more practical workbook.
It's about finding what resonates.
Absolutely.
Now, the book also talks about this thing called the reflection process.
Yes, the reflection process.
Why is that important in REBT?
Well, it's all about giving you the space
Yeah.
to really think about what you're learning in therapy,
Okay.
how it connects to your experiences,
Yeah.
and what you want to work on moving forward.
I can see how that would be valuable.
And another crucial aspect is making sure we're speaking the same language.
Right, because sometimes words can have different meanings to different people.
Exactly.
It's like rational.
In everyday language, rational might just mean logical or sensible, but in REBT, it has a much more specific meaning.
Okay.
It means flexible,
Okay.
not extreme,
Right.
based on reality, and helpful for your overall well-being.
So it's not just about being in your head.
Not at all.
It's about those thoughts actually leading to positive outcomes.
Exactly.
And this whole language thing is super important when we're talking about emotions.
Oh, absolutely.
Because REBT makes this really clear distinction between healthy negative emotions
Yes.
and unhealthy negative emotions.
And this can be confusing for people.
Yeah, because we're so used to thinking of all negative emotions as bad.
Right. But REBT says that healthy negative emotions, like sadness or concern,
Yeah.
are actually appropriate responses to difficult situations
Okay.
when they're based on realistic appraisals.
So it's like, it's okay to feel sad when something sad happens.
Exactly. It's human.
Right.
But then we have unhealthy negative emotions.
Right.
Anxiety, depression, anger, guilt.
And these are the ones that often stem from those irrational beliefs.
That's right.
So it's not about trying to eliminate all negative emotions.
No, it's about learning to differentiate between the healthy ones that are serving us
Right.
and the unhealthy ones that are causing us suffering.
Okay, that makes sense.
It's a subtle but really important distinction.
Now, the book also mentions goal setting in REBT.
Yes, Albert Ellis had some interesting views on goals.
Okay, what were they?
Well, he was actually pretty cautious about setting very specific short-term goals.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he was concerned that therapists might accidentally impose their own goals on clients.
Which would kind of defeat the purpose of empowering the client.
Exactly. And if those goals weren't met,
Mhm.
it could lead to feelings of failure or discouragement.
Okay.
But the book also acknowledges that having broader therapeutic goals,
Yeah.
those bigger picture changes you want to achieve,
Yeah.
those are still really important for motivation and direction.
It's like needing a roadmap for your journey.
Exactly.
So it's a balance between having a general direction,
Right.
but not getting too bogged down in micromanaging every step.
Absolutely.
Now, beyond just changing beliefs, what other types of change does REBT aim for?
So the book outlines a few different areas.
Okay.
First, there's inferential change,
Inferential change.
which is about how you interpret events.
Okay, so instead of jumping to the worst case scenario,
Exactly.
you learn to consider other possible explanations.
Like, maybe your boss was just having a bad day.
And it wasn't actually about my performance.
Right. Then there's behavioral change.
Which is about actually changing our actions.
Right.
Like trying new things we might have been avoiding out of fear.
Exactly.
Okay.
And then there's environmental change.
So that's about making changes to your surroundings.
Yeah, to reduce triggers or create a more supportive environment.
Okay, that makes sense.
Like if your job is constantly stressing you out,
Yeah.
it might be time to explore other career options.
I see.
Or if certain friends are always bringing you down,
Uh-huh.
maybe it's time to distance yourself from those relationships.
So it's not just about changing your thoughts.
Right.
It's about taking action to create a more supportive environment for yourself.
And the book also mentions different therapeutic settings.
Yeah.
Individual therapy, couples therapy, group therapy.
So REBT isn't just for individuals.
Not at all.
Okay.
Each setting has its own strengths and weaknesses.
Right.
And it really depends on the client's needs.
Yeah. Makes sense.
For example, couples therapy can be really helpful for addressing relationship issues that are fueled by irrational beliefs.
Oh, I can see that.
Like, my partner must always agree with me,
Right.
or if my partner doesn't do this, it means they don't love me.
Yeah, those kinds of thoughts can really damage a relationship.
Absolutely.
Now, something else the book mentioned that I was curious about was the idea of clients recording their therapy sessions.
Yeah, that could be a really valuable tool.
But I can also see how it could be weird.
It definitely takes some getting used to.
So what are the benefits of recording sessions?
Well, it allows you to go back and listen to the session again
Okay.
at your own pace.
Yeah.
You might catch things you missed the first time around.
Right, because when you're in the moment, you're not always fully absorbing everything.
Exactly.
And it also lets you really hear those irrational beliefs
Yeah.
that you might not have even realized you were saying.
Right. It can be really eye-opening.
And the book also mentions that recordings can help you track your progress.
Absolutely.
Like you can listen to a session from a few months ago and really hear how your thinking has changed.
It's like having a record of your journey.
So cool.
But the book also acknowledges that there can be some downsides. Some people get really self-critical about their voice.
Oh, yeah, I can see that.
Or they become so reliant on the recordings
Yeah.
that they stop actively participating in the session.
Right, because they're so focused on capturing everything.
Exactly.
So it's about finding a balance
Yeah.
and using the recordings as a tool for growth.
And if recordings aren't your thing, the book suggests taking notes instead,
That's a good alternative.
as long as you're actively reflecting on the session.
Now, the book also talks about how it's generally good practice to explain the reasoning behind different interventions,
Transparency is key.
but it also mentions some exceptions.
Yeah, there are certain techniques,
Yeah.
especially what we call inactive techniques.
What are the...
Those are more experiential exercises,
Wow.
where the power comes from the experience itself.
Mm-hmm.
And explaining it too much beforehand
Yeah,
might actually lessen the impact.
I see.
It's like when you're surprised by a gift,
Yeah.
if you knew exactly what you were getting beforehand,
It wouldn't be as special.
right, sometimes the element of surprise is important.
So it's about using your judgment
Absolutely.
and knowing when to provide a rationale
Yeah,
and when to just let the experience speak for itself.
exactly.
Now, going back to a core idea in REBT,
Yeah,
that your beliefs are the foundation of your experiences,
right.
and that you're ultimately responsible for those beliefs.
One of the cornerstones of REBT.
But the book really stresses that intellectually getting this idea
Yeah,
is just the first step.
it's a big first step.
Yeah, but there's a difference between knowing something in your head and actually living it.
Totally.
It's like, you know intellectually that exercise is good for you, but actually getting yourself to the gym consistently,
Much harder.
it's a whole other thing.
Exactly, and that's where the real work comes in.
So how do we bridge that gap between understanding and actual change?
Well, it's a process.
Yeah.
It takes practice and commitment,
Right.
and a willingness to keep coming back to those core principles,
Even when it's hard.
especially when it's hard,
Yeah.
because that's usually when we need them the most.
And the book also highlights the importance of clearly stating those rational beliefs
Absolutely.
in their full and explicit form.
Right.
Why is that so important?
Because it's so easy for those rational thoughts to
Yeah.
kind of morph back into irrational demands.
Without us even realizing it,
Exactly. So instead of just thinking, I want to do well,
which is fine on its own,
it is.
but it can easily slip into I must do well,
Exactly.
which is a demand.
Right.
So the more rational belief is something like, I prefer to do well, but it's not a necessity.
That's much better.
That subtle shift in language,
Yeah.
it can make a big difference.
And it helps to prevent those irrational thoughts from sneaking back in.
Okay, now something that I think is unique to REDT
Yeah.
is that clear distinction between healthy and unhealthy negative emotions.
It's a cornerstone of the approach.
So can you walk us through that again?
Absolutely. So REBT posits that unhealthy negative emotions,
Immediately.
anxiety, depression, anger, guilt,
Okay, yeah.
these are often rooted in rigid, irrational beliefs.
The ones we've been talking about.
Exactly.
Okay.
But then you have healthy negative
You
emotions,
say.
concern, sadness, frustration, remorse.
And these are seen as natural responses to negative events.
Right. They're not necessarily pleasant,
Right.
but they're not based on those distorted, irrational beliefs.
So they're more in line with reality.
Exactly.
Okay, so the main focus of REBT is on changing those unhealthy negative emotions.
Right. We're not trying to eliminate all negative feelings.
Okay.
We're trying to help people live with a greater sense of peace and well-being.
So the book uses this really powerful analogy to illustrate why addressing emotional disturbance is so important.
Oh, yeah, the ball and chain analogy.
Can you explain that?
So imagine you're trying to walk uphill,
Okay.
but you're dragging a heavy ball and chain behind you.
That sounds exhausting.
It is.
And that's kind of what it's like to live with a lot of emotional baggage.
Exactly. That underlying emotional distress makes everything harder.
It weighs you down.
It makes it harder to learn new skills,
Yeah.
to make positive changes in your life.
To even just get through the day.
Exactly. So RBT focuses on addressing that emotional disturbance first.
Like clearing the path.
Yes, so you can move forward with more ease and freedom.
Okay.
And the book also talks about how those irrational beliefs can actually lead to even more negative interpretations of events.
So it's like a vicious cycle.
Exactly. One irrational thought can trigger another,
Yeah.
and then another.
Until you're spiraling.
It can feel like you're trapped.
Right. And then the book also talks about the reality of lapses and relapses.
Yeah, those are a normal part of the process.
And they don't mean you've failed.
Absolutely not.
So how do we approach those setbacks with a more REBT mindset?
Well, self-acceptance is key.
Okay.
Beating yourself up for having a relapse.
Yeah.
That's just going to make things worse.
It's adding fuel to the fire.
Exactly. So instead of getting caught in that self-blame,
Yeah.
we want to use those setbacks as opportunities for learning.
Like, what can I learn from this experience?
Exactly. What triggered the relapse?
Yeah.
What were the irrational thoughts I was having? How can I better prepare myself for next time?
So it's about turning those setbacks into stepping stones.
Exactly.
Now the book moves into addressing some common misconceptions about REBT.
Yeah, there are a lot of myths out there.
So what's the first one the book tackles?
That really intense negative events directly cause disturbed emotions.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one.
So while REBT acknowledges that traumatic experiences can definitely cause significant distress, the core principle of emotional responsibility comes into play here.
Okay, how so?
So even in the face of a truly awful event, REBT says that it's our beliefs about that event
Yeah.
that lead to prolonged unhealthy emotional disturbance.
So for example.
Let's say someone experiences a terrible car accident.
Okay.
They might develop the irrational belief, this shouldn't have happened to me,
Right.
or I should have been more careful.
Those are pretty common thoughts after a trauma.
They are, but REBT says that those beliefs aren't an inherent consequence of the accident itself.
Okay.
They're interpretations that we add.
So we're not saying that the person caused the accident,
Not at all.
but we are saying that they're contributing to their own suffering.
By holding on to those rigid, self-blaming beliefs.
Right.
And it's important to note
Yeah.
that this can be a really challenging concept to grasp.
Especially when someone has gone through something horrific.
Absolutely. And the book emphasizes approaching this with sensitivity and compassion.
Right. It's not about blaming the victim.
No, not at all.
It's about helping them see that their thoughts were playing a role in their distress.
And the good news is that if events directly caused emotional disturbance, then overcoming it would be much, much harder.
So there's hope.
There is,
Yeah.
because we have the power to change our thoughts.
Now, another common worry people have is that taking responsibility for their emotions means blaming themselves.
Yeah, that's a big misunderstanding.
So how do we differentiate between those two things?
So emotional responsibility in REBT is not about blame.
Oh, okay.
It's about recognizing that you have control over your thoughts,
Right.
and those thoughts are what shape your feelings.
It's not about dwelling on the past.
Right. REBT is very much focused on the present.
Okay.
So it's about looking at the irrational beliefs you're holding on to now, about events that might have happened in the past.
Yeah.
But it's not about saying that the past is making you feel bad now.
Okay, I see the distinction.
It's about how you're choosing to think about those past events in the present moment.
That's a subtle but important difference.
Absolutely.
Now, another criticism of REBT is that it's too focused on thinking and not enough on feeling.
Oh, yeah. That's a common one.
So what's REBT's stance on that?
Well, while REBT doesn't prioritize just venting or catharsis,
Okay.
or spending a lot of time dissecting every nuance of your emotions, it absolutely acknowledges the importance of experiencing your feelings.
Okay.
In fact, recognizing and feeling your emotions.
Yeah.
That's often the first step in identifying those underlying irrational beliefs.
Because you have to be aware of what you're feeling
Exactly.
to even start to question why you're feeling that way.
So it's not about ignoring or suppressing your emotions.
Right.
It's about understanding how those emotions are connected to your thoughts.
And then using that understanding to challenge the thoughts that are causing you suffering.
Precisely.
Now, the book also talks about the dynamic between the therapist and the client in terms of equality.
Right.
It's not a perfectly equal relationship, is it?
Not in the sense that we both come to the table with the same knowledge about RBT.
Right.
The therapist is the expert in REBT principles.
Yeah.
But the goal is to empower the client to become their own rational thinker.
So it's more like a teacher-student relationship.
In the beginning, yeah.
Okay.
But eventually the student becomes the master.
So to speak.
Exactly. And a good RBT therapist will encourage you to question their ideas,
Okay.
to really think for yourself, not just blindly accept what they say.
Which is the opposite of brainwashing.
Exactly. It's about giving you the tools to think critically and independently.
And the book also addresses the concern that RBT is very rigid and structured.
Yeah.
What's the truth about that?
Well, RBT does often utilize structure,
Like how?
things like setting an agenda for sessions.
Okay.
But that structure is meant to be a helpful framework,
Right.
not a straitjacket.
So it's adaptable.
Absolutely. A good therapist will be flexible
Yeah.
and adjust the structure to meet your individual needs.
Like if you come in with a crisis,
Exactly.
you might need to deviate from the plan.
And the level of structure can also be tailored to your personality.
So some people might need more structure than others.